All right, so I've been rabbit holing on what the Federal Reserve is today for like 3 hours. I was videoing it all, but I lost it. But I'm just gonna keep rabbit holing. I'll just give you a quick summary. I haven't really found, honestly, I'm kind of just like googling around and looking at stuff, chat GPTing around now. I haven't really found too much like crazy interesting. I mean, there's some interesting stuff, but I am getting an understanding of how they control how the feds control stuff. Like the only interesting things I really found so far. So like just if you're interested in the feds, read Wikipedia. It basically gives you the shtick. It'll give you the conventional wisdom. I tend to look for things that are like interesting to me. Like, oh, that's interesting. That's so usually I think about how can I make money off of this. Um, but so I guess the few interesting things are like the Federal Reserve requirement dropped to zero right before the pandemic, which is interesting. So like anything that people like talk about how it works and stuff. But once they drop this Federal Reserve requirement to zero, I think you have to like rework that model in your head. And there's a lot of decent amount of interesting stuff around here about dropping it to zero. But like so now they don't have to require anything. I looked at I just wanted to get a feel for like number wise how like money in the economy like GDP is 23 trillion in the U.S. Just like the Fed's the Fed's balance sheet or whatever is like 8 trillion, like roughly speaking. So they have like they can. I was just making sure that they could impact the economy, and it wasn't more just like a a thing that people believed in. It's like I think their actions can actually they basically are big enough to actually impact the economy. If you don't understand how the feds work, I didn't either until I started looking into it, and I still don't fully, to be honest. But my understanding is more or less what the feds do. They basically try to do two things. They try to stimulate the economy or unstimulate the economy. And by stimulating the economy, they just put cash in the economy. And by the way, they do that by, and this took me a long time to understand because all the like everything out there kind of hides the ball a little bit on it. But they'll buy so a lot of banks and I think big financial institutions. I think banks basically have treasury bonds or so the United States Treasury bonds. The Treasury issues the bonds and says, okay, you give us some money, we'll give you this amount of money like 10 years later or whatever. It's a Treasury bond. So a lot of the financial institutions have those, and the feds will buy those from the financial institutions. So what do they buy them with? Nothing. They print money. They print money to buy them. They don't actually have a money printer, but it's electronic. But more or less, they print money. So to me, that's a little bit crazy because, or it's a little bit of a area where I think it's like in my opinion, like a gray area because um, I thought about it as like if you're a Snickers salesman and you're going around selling Snickers house to house, but one house um, can will buy any amount of Snickers and they can print money to buy the Snickers. It's gonna like increase the price of Snicker bars, right? So all the other poor houses are gonna be like, well, I'm not gonna buy a Snickers because if the one house with free money is buying Snickers, the price is gonna go really high. But as a Snickers salesman, you're in a great spot because you can just go sell to that house at a very high price, and anyone who wants to buy the Snickers is gonna have to pay a high price. So if you're a person who can sell treasury bonds, uh, whenever the feds are trying to stimulate the economy, I think you're in a really good spot, which is interesting. Like if I was a bank, I'd be like, okay, when are they gonna try to stimulate the economy? Because then you can like probably make a lot of money. I could be wrong on that, but it seems like an opportunity. Um, and then once they buy so they're using fake money to buy all these treasury bonds, right? But then they actually have real treasury bonds once they buy it, and the feds earn interest off the treasury bonds. Interest that the interest might be that's basically the same thing. Once the treasury bonds, yeah, they earn interest on. I don't know if interest is the right word, but yeah, I mean I think you get paid interest on treasury bonds, if not like at like a certain rate, right? So they earn interest on those, but any income they make goes right back to the federal government or the Treasury. And just to get a scale of that income, like last year they paid like 54 billion to the government, back to the government. They call it remittance. And just put that in perspective, like the U.S. the total tax revenue last year is 4.9 trillion. So it's a lot less. It's only like 1% of the total tax revenue. So if you're the Treasury, you like kind of don't care that much about that, which to me is a little bit important because clearly the Feds and the Treasury have like a very tight relationship, and it's also circular. I mean, it's nice that if you're the Treasury, you can issue bonds and then pay interest on those bonds, but a big owner of those bonds that you're paying interest to gives you all the interest back. So that's nice. And then, so I talked about how they can increase the supply of money because they just put a bunch of cash. And one more thing is, so like when they put a bunch of cash, so I just thought about it as like if I'm the Feds, I kind of like to think about that because like mentally I can put myself in their shoes. So if they don't really care about, like what they care about is increasing the money supply, and they do that so they print cash, they pay that cash to banks, and banks give them in exchange a Treasury note. So then all the banks will have a lot of cash. So if there's a ton of cash, the price of borrowing cash is going to go down, I think. Yeah. If there's a lot of cash, the price of borrowing cash will go down. If you look on the internet, like everything says, like there's this idea of the overnight lending rate between banks. That to me is just like a confusing way to say the interest rate, because also like in anything you read, they'll be like the overnight interest rate because banks are required to keep reserves, but banks aren't required to keep reserves, not officially. So one of the big questions I had was, why would banks need to borrow cash? And the answer is like almost they probably don't ever, but maybe they do. I don't know in practice. Like in principle, the only reason they need to, in my head anyways, I'm not a banker, you might know more, but just to meet liquidity. So I can't imagine liquidity is that much. I mean, it feels like it would be low. It's not like they have to have reserves. That reserve rate is zero. It used to be you have to have like 10%. If you have $100, you'd have to keep like 10%, like $10 in the Federal Reserve. That rate is zero. And I also looked up like the countries, just because this is kind of interesting. This is like all the countries and their reserve requirements. So there's only four countries, or like one, two, three, only four countries that have a reserve requirement zero. And I felt like it was a little bit scandalous at first, but now I don't know. I mean, the whole system's pretty wonky. So it's a little weird you can only have zero, but like, what's going to happen? I mean, if the banks overextend, like as long as they have the assets, it's just a question of liquidity, really. I mean, things could definitely happen, but it's like, at first I was really like, this is crazy because the difference between 1 and 0 is really crazy, but now I'm kind of like either they can, like, either they're solvent or they're not, kind of. And all sorts of things could make them go insolvent. So, like, even having 2% in your reserve requirements, it's like, doesn't matter. Because if everyone wants to cash out, I just think you're screwed anyways. And so you can go insolvent either way. It's much more complicated, like the question of whether you should trust the banks, I think. So now I'm like less concerned about that interest rate, although it does kind of, from a mental model standpoint, it's kind of like weird to think about. But yeah, apparently it doesn't matter that much. I don't know that it does. So anyway, so that's what I looked at. So then on the other side of this, so I talked a little bit about how they um, how they can increase the supply of money, but then how do they decrease the supply of money in the economy? And originally I was thinking, okay, well, they just buy the treasuries back, right? But that's confusing because it's like, well, or they don't buy them back. They sell the treasuries back. And I was like, okay, they could sell the treasuries, but like it doesn't make sense because like what they can't just sell. You can't just sell something, right? You have to have people have to be incentivized to sell it, and they don't offer like a special discount on the treasuries when they're selling it back to the banks. So just to be clear on my understanding of it, anyways, my understanding is when they want to decrease the amount of when the feds want to decrease the money supply, which basically tightens the economy so people spend less, they start selling those treasury notes back to the banks. So the banks give them cash, they hold the treasury notes. The treasury notes, you know, I don't know how much it actually matters, to be honest with you, but in principle, I guess they're illiquid. So they can't, like, lend them out. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. They might not matter. But I guess in principle, but I don't know. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. I should look at that. But for now, let's just assume that it does create illiquidity in like the rest of the economy. So how do the feds actually like facilitate? How do they get banks to buy those treasury notes back? Well, banks probably don't actually care about the treasury notes. They don't want them. But what they do is they have this IORB rate, which says like, hey, listen, if you buy a treasury, the way the mechanics of that buying the treasury note works is, I think anyways, the banks actually they have like an account with the Federal Reserve. So if you buy a treasury note from the Federal Reserve, you get money in your account. And then you earn interest on that money in your account. And they literally just say, there's no mechanism for that interest rate. They just say, we're going to pay you this much money. And right now it's 4.9%. It's pretty decently high. So if you're a bank, you're going to be like, all right, well, that's pretty good. So we'll just we'll buy a bunch of these treasury notes from the feds. And also I think I don't know if they just sell treasury notes or other instruments too, but I think you can just buy assets. I'll just use the term treasury notes from the feds. And then you have an account with them and you earn 4.9% interest. And so like, it's an interesting thing. But yeah, it kind of like, so either way, the banks have this ability. It's like if you're a bank and you can give out loans, you sell loans. The way I would think about this is like, so I can sell loans for a certain amount of people. I'm going to try to go to a bunch of dumb people and sell loans for like 15%. I'm always going to keep trying to do that. But like, if I can't do that, I'm just going to put the rest of my money into the Federal Reserve so I can earn 4.9% interest on it. This is confusing. I'm still confused, to be honest. But this is kind of my current understanding. It's not very good, as you can see. I'm going to try to understand more. With what money does the feds pay the IORB interest? So this is an interesting thing. So like I was like, well, how are they going to like they create money out of thin air when they buy treasury securities from the banks, but what happens when the banks how do they pay their interests to the banks? Like if banks have an account with them, how do they pay that interest? And to me, it's like still a little bit unclear, but I think the answer is they make a ton of money. And so they use it with like basically they have income, so they pay it with their income. But I think if they run out of income, there's an interesting article here. Brookings, what if the Federal Reserve books losses because of its quantitative easing? It's like it could happen. The answer, at least that this organization's giving, is it doesn't matter. Like basically they'll just book losses, and when they start making money again, it'll offset those losses. So they're not too concerned about that. And frankly, I think they'll be all right. They have so much in assets. It's crazy. It's just a question of liquidity. So anyways, I'm trying to understand. It's kind of where I am now. So I still am thinking like more questions. I guess some of my more scandalous questions are like trying to understand what decisions they'll make moving forward. And so I want to understand incentives. And so I wonder if, how many employees does the Federal Reserve have? So this, yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting. I thought that might be the case. So the Federal Reserve has to give all its money back to the government, right? Or all its net income back to the government. Back to by government, I mean the Treasury. That was like that 60 billion or whatever, or 76 billion. But one thing that could definitely, so like, one of the things I'm trying to understand, to put it simple, is where the let me get to this screen. Well, is where this chart's going. This is the federal interest rate. So like when this number starts to go down, it's very likely that I think the equities market surges. Basically, the economy starts to expand again. I think when this number goes down, at least it could, but it matters. I think when they start to when they stop raising the interest rate, it's a funny way to phrase it. The way I should phrase it was when they stop paying banks more money to keep their money with them, then banks will keep their money will lend out more to other people, and potentially stimulate the economy again. And so the Federal Reserve is like charged with keeping inflation at a certain rate, but my other question is like, okay, that's what they're charged with, but will they actually function that way? And one thing that's interesting is like, if it's an organization paying salaries, a lot of people in that organization are going to be, they're not going to want to have a loss, because it could be a problem. Maybe not. I don't know. But it's curious to understand, because this is interesting. Like, this is saying, like, they might start losing money. Brookings.edu. Is that a college? I don't know what that is. I feel like all these organizations are a little bit, they're going to toe the line to some degree. which is fine because they're still giving us information that they're still saying stuff that could be helpful. Bottom line is the Federal Reserve could have a negative operating income or negative income. And the question is that a problem for them? They're only 1% of revenue, so for the Treasury, so it's not really a problem for the Treasury. Not a big problem. I'm sure they would prefer to get money from the Federal Reserve. Here's the thing, like, so the only answer to this, I think, is the banks. That's what I would say. So it's like yeah, it makes it super easy for the banks, you know. I think. Just curious to see. I'm just curious to see some of the banks, like income statements, to see. Jeez. So there you go. I wish I could see a longer graph. Pretty good though. Their market cap, 150 million. love how they're just grades. Imagine working here and you start out and you're like grade 16, you just gotta slowly move up to get to grade 31. These are the meds. I don't know what any of that means. I mean, I barely know what that. I don't really understand. Okay, that's fine. I mean, what else am I trying to understand? They have. I'm trying to understand stuff that's interesting about it. I was also just looking at other countries too to see what they do. India has this thing. Most other countries, I think, they have a similar Federal Reserve Bank. It's interesting enough they like come about with similar reasons. It's always like some crisis, and then they get implemented. But the United States, our Federal Reserve is like a little bit private. It's kind of unclear, a little bit confusing. I'm curious on the Federal Reserve Board. Let me see, like Wiki. I gotta check Wikipedia. So bump. These have 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. J Powell. Is this the wrong? Sever, I think. Maybe I have the wrong. Where'd that go? I am a little. It's 2. That'd be about right. 2004, right? Yeah, I think that's it. I did not. I don't know. What I'm trying to look at is just see if Jeremy Powell has any like other things that he cares about that would make him be incentivized to. Probably mostly working on the feds. But that's a different guy. I mean, honestly, it's probably hard in his position to do anything that would be too seedy. So it's more of just like what he actually thinks should happen, I think. I mean, there might find anything. Yeah. To me, this just kind of all seems on the uppity up. I usually look for stuff that's a little bit interesting in some way. I mean, not really all on the uppity up. You have it's got some funkiness, but there's always going to be some funkiness. Yeah, I just wonder what's going to happen. I just wonder if they're going to keep raising the rate or lower it. I don't know. It's hard to say. I have no real insight.
Made breakfast burritos.
All right, sweet. Oh, I like that chart. Sure, my fat isn't in the way. Oh, really? FOMC participants assessment of appropriate monetary policy midpoint of target range. That's interesting. I don't know where they got that data, but that would mean they're saying that in 2024 the rate, it would start to drop the rate and then bring it back down to 2.5%. Yeah. What the heck? Oh, yeah, that's good. stuff with a little bit of grain of sand, but it's kind of. Huh. So they would have to keep lowering, just like rough math on this. So that's, if the slope is about the same, when's that? June 22. Can I just get these numbers? Oh, so like so when's our peak? We say this is the peak. Got it? Kinda having trouble. Need to flip these. I flip them. Yeah. Yeah, that flipped. Okay. I should be able to do it without that, but okay. I wonder if we could just like so. It's a pretty solid trend. It doesn't mean everything, but so my rough estimate on that we go 9 to 4. Okay, G says 2%. So, and when they'll probably stop raising the rates. I don't know, like rough math, it would be like, let's see, this is about like 1% every 3 months. 1% 3 months, 3 months. Yeah, I call it 1% every 3 months. Dropped pretty good in March. 3 more months and 6 months, it would be about 2. So they could probably, like, it would be about here. I could do the actual chart, but it's just 2. It doesn't need to be that precise. It'll be about, let's see, it's about 5%, so it'll be about 4% here, about 3% here in 6 months. So my guess is they'll at least not be raising the rates within 6 months. So that means, I think, I bet the market will anticipate it a little bit earlier, like right in here. Sure how it's calculating these. But it's about how I would calculate it. It's kind of weird, but I don't know how this, but I more or less agree with this. Let me just see what it did there. I don't know what it Excel is doing. Yeah, that's fair. I think it actually took just the linear average. We're in April. Yeah, but they're gonna stop raising around here, August or September. Like, all right, we're good. It's interesting. I bet the market will see it a little bit early too, like around here. I bet they'll be getting signs. We're in April, May, June. I bet things will start looking up in June. Could very well happen. Well, okay. I think I got an understanding. Like, I don't feel totally satisfied, but I think I understand how they're controlling things at least, which is kind of important to me. Well, the one other thing that was interesting is the Treasury doesn't print money. It's the Fed. Only the Feds print money. The Treasury just, I mean, kind of. The Treasury just gives out loans. All right, that's probably enough for today. My brain stopped working, so it's like I'm just not thinking of any interesting ideas or avenues to look. All right, bye.